This is Frank Islam, Chairman and CEO of FI Investment Group and your host of Washington Calling, where we interview leading voices from business and politics that impact you, the viewer. Today we are honored to have a very distinguished guest, and he is Mr. Shivshankar Menon. He's an Indian diplomat who served as India's Foreign Secretary as well as National Security Advisor. Prior to that, he was Indian High Commissioner to Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Ambassador to China and Israel. Thank you, Mr. Menon, for coming to our show, and welcome to our show. Thank you for all you're doing and you have done to make a profound difference in people's lives.
Thank you for having me. It's good of you to ask me.
Thank you, Mr. Menon. I know you come from a very illustrious family of diplomats and civil servant. Is this part of your DNA or a part of your blood? Tell us a little bit about your family's story, your journey. As I understand, your father and grandfather also served Indian Foreign Service. So you keep the family flag flying brightly.
Well, there were, 3 generations of us. I think there were at least 4 of us who were in the Foreign Service. But it stopped with me. And my son, when he asked me, do you think I should join the Foreign Service? I said, you should do what suits you, what you enjoy. And frankly, I think he enjoyed math much more than diplomacy. So that's where he went. He's now, I don't understand his math, frankly. I'm not very good at this. But he works in the US right now.
Where? Which part of the US?
Outside DC, actually.
DC, can you connect me with him? And he probably knows who I am.
I will after this. But so, in fact, I actually told him not to. My own advice was, because I said, this is not a family business, diplomacy. And what each of us has had to do, what my grandfather did, what my father did, what I did, completely different from what the other one did, because the world has changed so much. And now when I look at the state of the world around us, I'm glad I suggested that to him.
You did the right thing. And your son works for an IT company, correct?
No, he works for Standard & Poor's.
Oh, I know where it is. Yeah, S&P, right. Yeah. Oh, we live in Potomac, Maryland, which is not too far from the...
That's not too far.
Yeah, and it's one of the largest complex in the United States that we live. So thank you very much. Let me change the conversation and ask you that you have been India's Foreign Secretary as well as National Security Advisor under Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, who I admired so much. How do you see India's global standing today? Has the landscape changed better or worse since you were the secretary? And also, can you reflect on current India's foreign affairs strategy, including the current economic crisis that they're in? And India needs to change its attention to the economy to create jobs, build prosperity, and that's not what's happening under the current government. Is that what you think, Mr. Menon?
Well, my own approach is that yes, the world has changed very fundamentally, and every time the world around us has shifted, basically, we have had to adjust our foreign policy. In 1989, the Cold War ended. Pretty soon, the Soviet Union collapsed. We revised most of our foreign policy, actually, and started changing the way we dealt with the world. Once the globalization decade started, we started transforming our relationship with the US. And this was done by all political parties in India and in the US. It was done, it was bipartisan in the US
support. You're absolutely
and
right.
in India as well. This wasn't just one party or the other. I mean, Narasimha Rao might have started it, but Vajpayee saw it through, and Manmohan Singh did the civil nuclear, and so you know the story. So for me, when the environment changes, you need to adjust what you're doing. And we have done that successfully at each stage. This time, we're in a real phase transformation. We are hit by a triple whammy. I mean, if you look at the world economy has crashed, you have COVID, you have a huge health crisis, but you also have a fundamental shift in the balance of power, which has been going on for the last few years. where you see a potential challenger to US primacy in China, and you see this growing competition, contention between China and the US. All this requires a very different Indian response from what we used to do. In, I say, my time, I mean, it's really actually, as you said, Dr. Manmohan Singh's time, in Mr. Vajpayee's time. And that is where I think it's hard to do, because we're between orders. Today, if you look at the world, we were in a unipolar world. Today, we're in a world where the world economy is multipolar. Power is spread. Militarily, it's still unipolar. The US is the sole superpower. The only country who can project power around the world today is the US. So it's still unipolar militarily. Politically, it's thoroughly confused. And what COVID has done is it has reduced everybody's reputation, power, and economic standing. Everybody is now struggling to get their economy going again, standing, create jobs. Most people's reaction to this much tougher environment abroad is to say, we'll turn inwards, we'll become more self-reliant, we'll do it ourselves. But the fact is, we can't solve these problems alone. We need to work with our partners, with our friends. So what happens? I mean, you can see the difference. In the last 10 years, India's relations, in the last 20 years actually, India's relations with the US have improved tremendously. With Japan, we're looking for, with ASEAN, and actually that goes back to Narasimha Rao starting Lookies. So we adjusted policy. We emphasized economic diplomacy, but today, again, we have big choices to make, and we have to choose. Today, the world economy is being broken into fragments, you know, RCEP, TPP in Asia, and there's a USMCA, or the success of NAFTA in North America, and the EU in Europe, and each one is becoming more protectionist. For India, did well out of a globalized economy. Mm-hmm. That's when we grew fastest, when we pulled 140 million people out of poverty in 10 years. That was the time when we really did well. So for us, we don't want a fragmented, broken down world, which is growing much more slowly. It's much harder for us to develop, transform. So we will adjust, and I think we will, but we are still in the process of deciding. So it's, you know, and that is what worries me when we walk away from RCEP and when we start raising customs duties for 4 years running. And when we, you know, it's one thing to say self-reliance while you engage with the world. It's another thing to say self-reliance, I'm going to shut myself off. And you have both types of people in India today.
Right.
Let's see.
Mr. Menon, you have been ambassador to both China and Pakistan, India's two principal adversaries now. How serious is a threat to India's security because of the Sino-Indian border dispute? Also, I want to ask you, do you see a brighter horizon in easing the tension between India and Pakistan?
You know, I do think that what's happening on the India-China border is serious, because we've never been in this situation before, not for a very long time. We haven't had deaths for a very long time. Now we do. We've had firing in the last week. So while both sides are saying the right thing, the foreign ministers met in Moscow yesterday, and they said, both sides say they want disengagement, they want peace and tranquility. But until peace is actually assured on that border, it is, for me, the biggest issue that we need to be dealing with. And it's something that we need to worry about. And I think the Chinese should be worrying about it as well. But let's see, that's still an open question, where it will lead to. We've been through similar periods in the past, but in the past, we've always negotiated our way out of it. And both sides have actually either pulled back, or whoever has moved forward has moved back, etc. And we found ways out of it. Now, in the last few years, China's relationship with Pakistan has also become much tighter. Correct. With the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, $62 billion pumped in. Also, China now has a presence in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir on what we consider Indian territory. So that actually now changes the nature of China's commitment. She now has a stake in continuing the present situation, meaning Pakistani occupation. And that makes a big difference to it. So yes, the problems are linked, but it seems to me that the traditional Indian way of dealing with this is to try and address the issues directly bilaterally with each of these. Is to deal with those issues we can with Pakistan, to deal with those issues which we can with China, deal with them bilaterally, deal with them directly, and move on. I mean, don't cooperate where you can, compete where you must, and if you have impossible issues, find a way of managing them.
Very well said.
And that, frankly, is the way, for me, the way forward. If you listen carefully to what E.M. Shivshankar is saying, in many ways, what he's saying is still what previous governments used to say. Of course, each government wants to say, I'm new, I'm very different, I'm better. That's normal, that's politics. You know democratic politics. But the fact is, I do believe that in terms of actual practice, we are still trying that. Whether it will work, I don't know. Because Pakistan's own condition, I think, doesn't support normal relations with India. And we seem to have worked ourselves into a situation where a measured, controlled level of hostility with India seems to suit those who have real power in Pakistan, the army. Pakistan army. And if it suits them, then that's, but controlled. I mean, they don't want to lose, but they need enough to justify their control at home, etc. And that's where we seem to be.
Right. I would hope there's an interest between India and Pakistan because they're border. They basically live together. They're the same people before the partition. They used to be part of India. They have to find a common ground and stand on their ground to work together because they all have shared goals and shared responsibility.
You see, I was lucky. I was sent to Pakistan by Mr. Vajpayee when, in what were probably the best years we've had in many years. I was there from 2003 to 2006 when, you know, in December 2004, I remember 18,000 Pakistani school children came to India for the winter, stayed with Indian families, went home. You open travel, you open trade, and we started the bus, Muzaffarabad, so you don't have to convince me of the virtues of this. And I do think that, we need to work at least to show the Pakistani people the benefits of peace.
That is very well said.
Because
I like the way
we're not enemies with the Pakistan people. We don't have a problem with them. We don't have a problem with Pakistani business. And Pakistani business is ready to do business.
And they should.
And they should. And we should too. Even civilian politicians, it's only some maybe who have opinions which are maybe very retrograde. But for most of them, for me, therefore, it's important that we segment policy, that we actually deal with people depending on whether there is a real problem there or not. But we shouldn't just lump our problem with the Pakistan army or the ISI on all Pakistanis. That doesn't make sense to me.
Well, but the current government seems to be geared, motivated by having not the conversation, but having the fight, because that's how they get the vote, unfortunately.
Well, that's when I say that it seems to suit those who have power.
That's have
some level of hostility, and that's unfortunate, but sadly true.
Mr. Menon, you're quoted as having said, and I think I watched the video, and I was able to find a little bit of time from the campaign. India has lost the ability to be a model country. You also said that India is isolated. Can you elaborate on this thought? Or also, do you still think that India is a global beacon of hope, democracy, diversity, and secularism? And can you reflect on your thoughts also on the Kashmir issue and the CAB and the human rights and the freedom of press and the freedom of religion in India, which has been a major talk and discussions in the Biden administration, in the foreign policy of the Biden team about this thing.
Well, it seems
But
to
we need
me
to work. I wanted to assure you that that there has been concern, but the bond for the Biden administration, the current, hopefully will be strengthened, will be better, and will take her to the next height U.S.-India relationship, because both have a shared values and shared interest.
Well, it seems to me that the Indian experiment of trying to transform India into a prosperous, strong, modern country while being a democracy, which is, and on this scale, I think this has global significance, and people have always recognized that. It obviously has huge significance for us in India, but it's still an experiment. I think we have to also recognize that, even after 70 years, which is why
we are still experimenting our own democracy after 250 years.
And that's not a bad thing, because it means that we're growing, we're evolving, we're adapting to change, to new things. That's good. I mean, I have no problem with that. But in our case, I think a lot of the friction that you see now in India, and things that you mentioned, you know, the agitation about the CAA, etc., the NRC, the responses, human rights, many of these are exactly where that friction at the edges is. And it's interesting. It's changed its form completely. In the 50s and 60s, we worried about separatism. You worried about revolution. I mean, you started with Telangana up in arms. You worried about a whole different set of issues. Today, what are you worrying about? Today, you're worrying about social inclusion. It's actually, you're worrying about inequality, which is a result of rapid growth and unequal growth. Some people have obviously done much better. Today, you're worrying about social issues which are very different from before. And you know, as NSA, I used to say, if you look at us this century, all the parameters of violence in India have actually declined steadily. And this is still true. You look at terrorism, look at deaths by separatism, you look at, you know, all these have gone down, except two things have gone up. And those are the dangerous ones. One is communal violence. Deaths by communal violence. The other is crimes against the person. This is social violence, you know. This includes things like rape and so on, which suggests a society in some kind of ferment, in some kind of change. So now these are not things that the traditional state or traditional policing, traditional security is good at. We're not good at dealing with society. These are social issues. Society has to sort them out. And what we're seeing on the streets, or what we see in terms of violence, is really the explosion of that. And that is the stage that we are at. So it worries me, certainly. But overall, I'm still an optimist. I think we can handle it. But part of it is because we've changed so fast. So many people have suddenly come out of traditional, they no longer have their family, their clan, their village, their traditional people support systems. They're now alone, anonymous in a city, completely exposed thanks to social media, telephones, etc., ICT, to a whole new world out there. And therefore you get shifts in politics. Politics becomes much more emotional, much more a question of mass mobilization, because the means exist. And the population is also now relatively, you have a young, new, rootless population. You look at politics, every general election, 140 million new voters. That's not a small number. No. 140 million.
That's a lot of people.
It shifts the nature of what happens in society in fundamental ways. So I think we need to get used to that and cope with it. I'm sure we will, but it's not going to be easy. Not this time. There will be friction in the process.
You also need the leadership to bring the people together.
Correct.
How do you see the trajectory of and I think you touched upon the U.S. relationship, Indo-United States relationship after the U.S. election, depending who's elected, but sounds like a poll shows that Biden is ahead in the poll. Do you believe the India-US relationship under Biden will include a lot more trade, commerce, investment, and also you see the Biden will promote the inclusive democracy and equitable society, as you mentioned, which is the values, which is consistent with the values of the America's democracy and character is conscious.
Well, Mr. Biden has been a friend of India for a long time.
Yes, he is.
When I was, when he was in the House in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee,
he was
for instance.
Chairman, yeah.
He was the chairman when we did the nuclear deal.
Right.
He came to India as vice president. He visited. He has a family connection which goes all the way back, actually.
I did not know that.
There are Bidens in Chennai. It started in Chennai, but there were Bidens from, I think, from the 19th century. And there are still some Bidens in Mumbai.
I need to talk to him to find that out. Is this because the family came from
East
Ireland?
India Company. This is from the East India Company days, all the way back.
Yeah.
But there is, I think in India there's a tremendous amount of goodwill for him as an individual and expectations of somebody who chose a vice presidential candidate who is of partly Indian origin. I think that made a huge impact throughout the country. It seems to me that even if you look at it purely from the realpolitik point of view, India and the US have more and more in common. And that congruence that is growing is going to keep growing. So I would expect both countries to do much more together in the years to come. I think this is a relationship which will actually do well, which will grow, which will flourish, deepen. But, and I think it'll expand beyond just the pure hard security issues into the other issues. There's a natural convergence in the economy, for instance, which I think both sides need to now actually go out and do something. And as things get harder, I think they are more focusing on this. Already, we're trying to do a trade deal, at least a phase 1 trade deal right now. But ultimately, I think we should be more ambitious and go for the big one. And I think we can do it. I really think we can.
And we should do it.
We must.
Mr. Menon, you were the National Security Advisor under Prime Minister Singh administration, and we mentioned that a minute ago. What do you think are the fundamental differences in the global view between Singh and Modi? But to an American, this administration is motivated by religious nationalism and being polarized and divisive and preaching fear, not hope. At least that's the impression that the Washington Post and the New York Times has. We need to bring the people together and to find and to pursue the common good.
I can't speak for the Modi administration or about the Modi administration. I haven't worked with him, or I don't know him closely. I know that Prime Minister Manmohan Singh had a view of India, which meant that India would do well when it was open to the world, and that the US was a natural partner in this because of the complementarity. As an economist, he saw the advantages. In fact, I think he'd done his PhD thesis on the advantages of trade, and the benefits that foreign trade actually gave an economy. He understood how the world worked. And I saw this especially after the 2008 crisis in the G20, when I saw the respect with which other leaders, not just President Bush, but then President Obama, who had just taken over, and Gordon Brown of the UK. So when we went to the April London G20 summit, I remember, this was one of the voices that everyone wanted to hear, that they'd keep asking, what do you think we should be doing? And, for me, that was very important because India could speak as an objective observer and project her own point of view at the same time. And I think that is important. Unless you are part at that level, unless you are part of the formation of ideas, you become an object of other people's policy. And the whole point of transforming India, of foreign policy is not to be the object, but actually to be the one who's the subject. I mean, you're taken off the menu. And, so I think that's the key. And that idea of building India's autonomy and role in the world, I think that's an idea which I think we need to stick to, even in hard times like today.
Mm-hmm.
And we shouldn't forget the basics. We need to keep our eye on the ball rather than, getting distracted by sideshows and other things. So, but as I said, I can't speak for this government. I don't know how they work, how differently. But for me, that was an education to watch how, you would say, oh, but that's very professorial. Yes, but the world is run by ideas ultimately.
I agree. And the ideals.
Very important.
I wanted to, before I close the conversation, I know you've been very much involved with the Indian diaspora. What do you think the Indian diaspora can do to help India achieve its fullest potential in furthering India's interest in the United States? I mean, there could be wider resource in healthcare, in innovations, entrepreneurship, philanthropy, education, and skills development, and also, creating new company and creating new jobs. How do you motivate the people who are watching for them to be involved, to be engaged with India, to help India to achieve its fullest potential?
You actually took the words from my mouth, because I've been telling all my friends that what we need for India and the US together is to actually be working on things like doing another green revolution, or at least changing the way we handle our farm produce, bring it to market, and basically modernize agriculture again.
Very
One
well
more. Education. This is something where we have so much in common.
Yes.
And where we can actually do so. And and there's a whole host of things, science and technology, etc. For me, the perfect bridge is the community, is the diaspora.
People engagement.
Yeah, the first time I went to the US in 1962, there were about 12,000 Indians. That's it.
A lot more now.
Yeah, 4 million we're talking now.
Right.
So this is a huge resource for both countries. I think it's also good for the diaspora to actually form that kind of bridge and to encourage that kind of interaction between India and the US, because it has for foreign policy, it has immediate impact, obviously. I mean, it's a force multiplier for both countries. But it's more than that. It also provides a bridge for other people like you. Don't forget where we all came from. Most of us are what? 2 generations, 1 generation away from a village.
Right.
And I think we owe it to the others.
So what advice?
I would appeal to the community.
That's what I wanted to ask.
To the diaspora, actually, that let's broaden the relationship between India and the US. Let's make this our job now.
That's very well said. You want to deepen and strengthen the relationship between people to people, relationship between India and the United States. And also, one of the things that that's not happening in terms of education, we need to send some of the Americans to India so they can learn the cultures, the arts, and many, many things that India has to offer, in addition to getting the students from India as well. So we got to do both ways. And that's something we lack, and we need to do a better job.
I think we need to open up as well. We need to open up our mind.
Very well said. My foundation sponsored many scholarship program for the journalists to come from India to United States. It hasn't panned out as well as it should have from Hindustan Times and from many, many other places that we had through the Alfred Press Friendly Scholarship Program, and that was through the University of Missouri. I think you probably know that, right?
I've heard of it.
And we will continue to do that. Unfortunately, sometimes you feel that there's no sense of gratitude for the recipient of those kindness and generosity. That's the way we are, and we need to learn that. And I want to thank you very much for coming to our show, and thank you. We'll continue our discussions and our conversation. And this is Frank Islam wishing you a great week, and thank you for watching.